I actually think community or extended schools, the empirical evidence from us is that that works too. And there's a very simple reason for that. What matters to those children is not simply what happens between 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That is absolutely clear. In other words, the school should become, if you like, a center for the support and nurture of the future generation, not simply education in the narrow sense, and a hub for the whole of the community. It should be a resource and a source of strength, not just for the people, the children, or the students that go in the school door, but also for the whole of the community. So what we found with our community schools, extended schools as we call them, using the facilities for adult learning. Because actually one of the problems often with parents is that if they've had a poor education, sometimes that is a disadvantage for them, obviously, but it's also a disadvantage for their children when their children are trying to learn. Breakfast clubs, and after-school clubs. Again, for some children, particularly those from problem or disadvantaged families, they may not have breakfast before they get to school. That's a problem for their education. It's a problem for their concentration. It's a problem for the way they behave at school. Youth development, dealing with some of the mental stresses and strains, as well as the physical shortcomings. Making sure, for example, for some kids, they can't go home and do their homework. I mean, it's not possible for them to do that. So you need to provide for that to be done. Now, by the end of next year, as John was saying to you, all our schools will be extended schools. We're actually getting this down to primary school level. I don't know, is that junior school? I don't know, whatever you call it. But it's a very, very important part of making education about the whole person and about the whole community. And I think the lesson we learn is that that definitely works and is important to do. The second thing about how to get there is that structures do matter to standards. I actually came to power in 1997, and I had this line which said, we're going to focus on standards, not structures. And about 3 years in, I went in, I think Michael remembers that, and I said, I think this is wrong. In fact, I'm not going to say it anymore, because every time I say it, I want to then contradict myself, which is not a great position for a political leader to be in, although one not entirely unfamiliar to me in my time of office. But actually the structures matter. So when you're thinking about, in the case of what we're talking about today, community schools, providing the right structures for this to be incentivized and developed is important.
The UK put a lot of effort, as Tony Blair just mentioned, in this concept of rooting extended schools as part of a community-based effort to really push education reform forward. I think we just did this report on community schools in the U.S. Here it still seems more like an experiment, like it's one more thing on the list. How central is it to actually achieving the range of education reform efforts that you're trying to do with Race to the Top and everything else?
These things are not in conflict. We need high standards. We need sort of national assessments. These guys have had it. We haven't done that. We got 48 states working hard on that. And we need our schools, every single school, to be open much longer hours and serving the community. And these things aren't in conflict. And I would argue that we have to move very aggressively, to the Prime Minister's point, and be bold in all of these areas. So our schools have to be open much longer hours with a wide variety of after-school activities for children and for parents. And when children learn and families learn together and the schools are part of the community, great things happen for children. Rich, poor, black, white, Latino, doesn't matter. When schools are islands from the community, when they're separated from the community, children suffer. And so I think we have to move with a huge sense of urgency in all of these areas.
As a student, as a young person, population is exploding across the globe in the United States, Great Britain. What can the government do? What can other organizations do to inspire young people to become teachers and educators?
This is a hugely important opportunity for us. We're going to have 1 million teachers retire over the next 5, 6, 7 years. And our ability to attract phenomenally talented folks into education and keep them is going to shape public education for the next 30 years here. It's a real generational shift. And Randi Weingarten, who's here, who's doing an extraordinary job as the head of the AFT and is a real partner in reform, not just in community schools, but in so many areas. If we can do that well, we'll change public education forever. If we don't do that well, we're going to perpetuate what we're doing. What do we need to do? 2 things. We need to make teachers in the teaching profession the revered profession that it needs to be. And other countries have done a much better job of raising status and raising prestige. So whether it's working with the president, whether it's working with the first lady, I'm always trying to learn something. Maybe we'll start a knighthood campaign here for teachers. But that's a big piece of it. And let me be clear, no one goes into education to make $1 million. Teachers are absolutely underpaid, but they go in with the most altruistic of reasons, and we got to better support that talent. So how do we as a country, sort of put a premium on the teaching profession? We have not done that, and we have a chance to break through.
Randy, let me start with you. You made community schools a major priority of the AFT the moment you assumed this new position. Tell us why.
You realize that we have to do more than simply instruct children for 7 hours a day. And as Prime Minister Blair said, the community school, the school can be the hub of the community. So if you know you need, or kids need, particularly poor kids, resources to level the playing field for themselves, not to make it an excuse for teachers, but how we embolden and empower kids. And you know that schools ought to be the center of communities. And you know that that is part of the promise of what you need to do if you believe in social and economic justice. It became a no-brainer. And so that's why I thought if I could use my first speech as national president to talk about community schools and co-locating services, we wanted to bring back how do you create a level playing field, particularly for poor kids. We do a quarterly magazine. I'm not advertising for our magazine, I'm using it as an exemplar. Jane has an article in here. I mean, the integration that I think we saw with Children's Aid is also a model for America, because there is a deep respect now for the work that each does and how we need to coordinate and integrate that work. We now say, thank God they're there. And they now say, thank God we're doing the kind of instructional changes that we need to try to do.